Recently, I had an experience where I purchased some light bulbs similar to these, but these are the translucent ones. They were the more frosted ones to put into my block signals, and they were of such poor quality that I sent them back. And what I decided to do is to see if I could use some inexpensive LEDs to replace the conventional incandescent bulbs by salvaging the base of a burned out bulb and soldering the LED into that base. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do today, at least how I did it. Here's an example of what the finished product looks like. And while it doesn't look exactly the same, of course, as the original incandescent bulb, it's reasonably attractive, and I suspect, unless it gets over voltage, will last forever. These are DC 9 volts to 12 volt range, and so far I've, using AC, cranked them all the way up to 18 volts and have had no issues whatsoever. So I'm going to assume that they will last a good long time. I'm going to put a text overlay on the video showing where I got these. I got these from Amazon. They were very inexpensive. I think I got 8 packages of 7 different colors for a total of 56 LEDs, and it was $7 and change, as I recall. So they're very inexpensive, and they work quite well. Now, these have a resistor in them, and I'm sure there are other LEDs available that don't have resistors in them. I'm going to guess that those resistors are there to protect them against overvoltage. But frankly, I don't have enough electrical experience to know exactly why they're there, but I can tell you from what I've tried so far that they work just great. So that's what we're going to do, and I'm going to go ahead and turn that guy off for right now. So the first thing you need, of course, is a burnt out bulb, and then the appropriate color LED. This is a green one, so I'll make it as a companion to this red one that I already have. And you also need a good soldering iron that you can change the temperature setting on. You'll need a solder sucker. I use flux. This flux is, I think, actually from the plumbing department at Home Depot, but it works great. And solder, of course, and then hot glue. And that's it. And I've made enough of these now that I can produce this in something in the order of 30 to 45 minutes total, which of course, if I were being paid some sort of professional wage, that would be way too much to spend for a light bulb. But since my labor is free, then these end up costing me a dead burnout light bulb and an LED that costs about 25 cents. So I think it's a pretty good compromise. Okay, so the first step is to salvage the brass screw base. This works equally well on a bayonet base from a bulb that's burned out. And the way I do this is I use a pair of pliers to break the bulb over a trash can. So once I've done that, then I have to clean out the rest of the glass and the glue and so forth that's in there. So I take a pair of needle nose pliers and I just work my way around. Just takes a little bit of patience, but just break out the glass that's still there. So that's what it looks like after you've cleaned out most of the interior glass and glue. Now what we need to do is get rid of the solder on the center connection on the bottom so that we can reuse that to solder in the LED. This is where the solder sucker comes in. For this, I'm going to crank my soldering iron up to 600 degrees or so. That's Fahrenheit if anybody's watching this from any other part of the world that uses Celsius. And then I'm going to use the solder sucker. So we just get down in here, get that solder melted. Maybe just a little bit more here. I think that's going to work. Want to be careful handling this with your bare fingers because it does heat up during that process. You also want to be very careful that you don't break this insulator between this bottom contact and the brass screw base. I think it's made of glass, it could be plastic, but in any case, you don't want to break it. I tried some different techniques at first and ended up breaking those. So this was the best technique I could come up with, which is using the solder sucker to get rid of the solder. Okay, now we're going to turn our attention to the LED. And there are two conductors on the LED. The one has a resistor on it and the other one does not. So I'm going to bend out the one with no resistor off to the side here. I'm going to trim this wire off, and then we're going to pull off the shrink wrap that was around the wire, and now I'll just desolder the rest of that bit of wire there. There's not a lot left there to work with, so you want to be careful that you don't lose any of that. Then, in the other wire, we're going to trim it off. And I'm going to cut around the base of the resistor here. And pull that off. And desolder the little bit of wire that was left on there. I'm lowering the temperature on the soldering iron to be just extra careful around the LED. Okay, so the next step is to get this glued into our brass base here. To clean that out just a little bit more. Okay. So the part with the resistor goes straight down and comes out here at the bottom where we use the solder sucker to remove all of that solder. And here's how we're going to do this. We're going to take just a little tiny bit of flux and we're going to put it on this end here because the flux makes the solder run so much better. And then, since I don't have a lot of hands to work with, I'm going to put just a little blob, I'm sure that's a technical term, of solder on the end of the soldering iron. I'm just going to bring it in here and touch it to that. And that's it. That part's done. That flux makes that happen so quickly. If you end up with a little bit of the conductor left sticking out, you can just trim that off. Now the other side is a little bit more troublesome. I have been unsuccessful several times doing this side because you've got just so little to work with. But what I need to do is, keeping the LED as centered as possible, I'm going to bend this conductor, put a little bend on it so that it'll sit flat on the edge of the brass base for a good solid soldering. Okay, that's pretty good. going to set that in there just to kind of keep it stable. And again, we're going to use some flux, but be very careful that you only put the flux where you want it, because the solder is going to run everywhere that there's flux, and you do not want to get it down into the threads of the base. And again, we're going to put just a very small amount of solder on the end of the iron and come in here and just touch that. Looks pretty good. You can see that I don't have the LED exactly centered, but that's okay. It's going to work just fine. Now let's test it and see if it's actually working here. And it is working. So the last step is to fill this cavity here with hot glue. Be careful on this step. I'm holding it with my fingers and it's going to get hot. So you just want to be cautious. They call hot glue for a reason. It's hot. You want to get the cavity completely filled and then bring it up around the base of the LED to really secure it in there, and it's getting very, very, very warm. And I am going to switch over to holding this with the pliers. And we're going to get a little more in there. Again, you want to make sure you're coming up around the base of the LED so it'll be held securely. Okay. That's pretty much the finished product, except that we're going to let it cool now before we attempt to put it into the base of the block signal over here. We want it to be good and solid and secure. Okay, that's pretty well dried or cooled. And again, you can see that my LED is not centered very well, but unless you're lucky enough to have an LED with a longer conductor on that one side, or something I plan to try in the future is try to solder that to the inside of the brass base, then you could get it centered a little bit better, but it really doesn't matter. You'll see here in a minute. So now we're going to try screwing it into the base here. Now, that seems to be in there. Moment of truth. There it is. So there you have it. Hopefully you'll find that to be an interesting project that will work for you. So here's an example of how I'm using these LEDs in block signals in my little tabletop layout here in my garage. There's two of them that I've set up with the LEDs, and you can see that if I change the switch, pretty cute, huh?